My name is Clara, 33 years old, and I spent my entire life trying to earn a seat at my family table. But as I sat in a freezing interrogation room at Frankfurt Airport, staring at two stern German border police officers, the truth finally sank in. My parents and my sister had not just abandoned me in a foreign country. They had stolen my passport, my phone, and my wallet, leaving me completely stranded without a single dollar to my name. They thought they had disposed of the family scapegoat permanently. What they did not know was that stranding a forensic accountant with access to their darkest financial secrets would be the biggest mistake of their lives. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been betrayed by your own blood, and stick around to see exactly how I destroyed their lives. The fluorescent lights of the airport security office hummed overhead, casting a harsh glare on the metal table between me and the officers. I shivered, wrapping my trench coat tighter around my shoulders. My pulse hammered violently against my ribs. I had been pulled aside at passport control when I tried to explain that my family had accidentally taken my bags. But the longer I sat there in that sterile room, the more the word accidentally felt like a naive delusion. The taller officer, a man with a thick beard and an unyielding expression, demanded my identification for the fourth time. His partner stood by the door, arms crossed, watching me with clear suspicion. I plunged my hands into my coat pockets, desperately praying my fingers would brush against a stray credit card or a driver license I had forgotten about. Instead, my right hand touched a piece of crisp paper. It was folded into a tight square. I pulled it out and smoothed it flat against the cold metal table. The stationery bore the logo of the luxury hotel we had stayed at the night before. But the handwriting was undeniably my younger sister Brittany. She is 30 years old, beautiful, pampered, and my parents' undisputed golden child. I stared at the elegant cursive, my brain refusing to process the words at first. Then the horrific reality of the ink on the page settled into my chest like lead. "We need you to disappear for a few days," the note read. "Do not try to fly back to Chicago. Mom and Dad say this is a necessary sacrifice for the family." The air vanished from my lungs. A necessary sacrifice. My hands began to shake so violently that the paper rattled against the table. I read the words again and again, hoping the sentence would magically change into a cruel prank. But the calculated malice remained. Panic, sharp and suffocating, seized my throat. I was thousands of miles away from home. I had absolutely no money. I had no identification to prove I was an American citizen. I had no phone to call for help or contact the authorities. I was utterly alone, erased from my own life by the very people who were supposed to protect me. The officers exchanged a look, their patience clearly wearing thin as they watched my silent breakdown. They asked me to explain the note. How could I possibly explain to these strangers that my own mother had orchestrated this trap? The memory played in my mind with sickening clarity. Just 2 hours earlier, we were in the first-class lounge, waiting for our connecting flight to Chicago. This entire European trip had been pitched to me as a family reconciliation vacation. It was generously funded by my arrogant brother-in-law, Jamal. Jamal is 34, an African-American investment banker with a taste for flashy cars and a talent for making me feel entirely inferior. My parents, Patricia, who is 60, and Gregory, who is 62, worshipped him because his money fueled their country club lifestyle. I was just the quiet, unmarried forensic accountant, the boring daughter they merely tolerated out of obligation. In the lounge, Patricia, who is always hyper-focused on appearances, had clumsily bumped into a waiter, spilling hot coffee all over my blouse. She gasped, playing the apologetic mother perfectly, and offered to hold my heavy leather tote bag while I rushed to the restroom to clean up. My passport, my phone, my wallet, everything I needed to survive was in that bag. When I emerged from the restroom 10 minutes later, scrubbing at the stain on my shirt, the lounge seating area was completely empty. Patricia, Gregory, Brittany, and Jamal were gone. I had run to the gate, pushing past crowds of travelers, only to watch the jet bridge retract from the plane. They had boarded the flight without me taking my identity and my lifeline with them. Now, sitting in the interrogation room, the pieces of their malicious puzzle snapped together. The spilled coffee was not an accident. The offer to hold my bag was a calculated theft. The German officer tapped his pen loudly against his clipboard, snapping me back to the terrifying present. He informed me in heavily accented English that without proper identification or a valid visa, they had no choice but to transfer me to an immigration holding facility for undocumented individuals. The walls of the small room felt like they were closing in on me. I tried to speak to beg them to let me contact the American consulate, but my voice failed me. I was about to be locked away in a foreign detention center, completely stripped of my identity, while my family flew back to the comfort of their lives in Chicago. The sheer cruelty of their actions left me paralyzed, staring blankly at the officers as they began to fill out my detention paperwork. Suddenly, the heavy metal door swung open. A man stepped into the cramped room, radiating an undeniable aura of wealth and authority. He was tall, dressed in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit, accompanied by a sharp-looking man clutching a leather briefcase. It was Harrison Tate, a 40-year-old venture capitalist I had recognized earlier from financial magazines. He had been sitting in the first-class lounge when my mother orchestrated her little coffee spill. The German officers immediately stood up, their hostile demeanor shifting to respectful attention as Harrison and his lawyer presented diplomatic and corporate credentials. Harrison bypassed the authorities entirely and walked straight to my chair. He leaned down, his expensive cologne cutting through the stale airport air, and positioned himself between me and the police. He lowered his voice so only I could hear. "Pretend you are with me. My private jet is waiting on the tarmac." He smiled coldly, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. "Trust me, they will regret this." The bearded officer slammed his heavy hand onto the metal table, shattering the fragile silence Harrison had just created. He rattled off a rapid stream of harsh German, pointing an accusatory finger directly at me. His partner moved closer, his hand resting instinctively on his heavy utility belt. The lawyer accompanying Harrison stepped forward smoothly, intercepting the aggression with a calm, authoritative tone, presenting a thick stack of embossed credentials. But the officers were not easily swayed. To them, I was not a victim of a sophisticated family betrayal. I was an undocumented traveler, a potential security threat, spinning wild, hysterical accusations to avoid deportation. The taller officer grabbed a thick stack of holding cell paperwork, slapping it down next to Brittany's crumpled note. He demanded to know how a supposedly wealthy American family could simply forget a grown woman in a foreign airport. He sneered at my story, claiming it made zero logical sense for parents to steal their own daughter's passport and fly away without a second thought. He tapped the transfer documents forcefully, making it brutally clear that Harrison's presence did not magically grant me a visa. The holding facility was already expecting my transfer. The transport van was idling outside Terminal 3 waiting to take me away. Every syllable the officer spat out tightened the invisible noose around my neck. They saw a woman with no identity, no return ticket, and a story that sounded completely unhinged to any rational outsider. The terrifying realization that law enforcement viewed me as a criminal rather than a victim completely paralyzed me. I watched the officer pick up his radio to summon the transport guards, aggressively ignoring the billionaire attempting to shield me. The sheer bureaucratic indifference was absolutely terrifying. They did not care about the cruel betrayal I had just suffered. They only cared about the missing passport and clearing their holding room. As the corporate lawyer engaged the officers in a fierce, high-speed debate in German, I stood frozen, staring at the blank concrete wall. My mind desperately searched for the reason behind this elaborate cruelty. Why go to such criminal lengths to erase me from the picture? The answer lay in the stark contrast between my life and theirs. I was the family scapegoat, the quiet, unmarried numbers cruncher who preferred analyzing financial ledgers over attending pretentious galas. I never fit into their flashy, debt-fueled country club lifestyle in Chicago. I was the boring, practical daughter who asked uncomfortable questions about their reckless spending habits. Then there was Jamal. He was everything they valued: loud, charismatic, and aggressively ambitious. With his gleaming silver Porsche and bespoke designer suits, he had effortlessly claimed the title of the golden child in law. My parents worshipped the ground he walked on, convinced his status as a high-rolling investment banker elevated their own social standing. They eagerly turned a blind eye to his profound arrogance, treating his lavish gifts and extravagant promises as absolute truth. Next to his blinding, superficial success, my quiet stability was an embarrassment to them. I was a constant, irritating reminder of the practical reality they desperately wanted to escape. Jamal had convinced them that my conservative nature was holding the family back from true elite status. Stranding me was not just about removing an annoyance. It was a calculated purge, a way to cut the dead weight, so they could fully embrace the fraudulent empire Jamal was building for them. They resented my independence because it highlighted their own financial insecurities and endless pursuit of shallow validation. Every time I had tried to warn my father about the dangerous financial maneuvers, Jamal was bragging about my parents accused me of being a jealous, bitter spinster. They chose his glittering lies over my professional truth. Leaving me locked away in Europe was their ultimate way of silencing the only person who could see through Jamal's perfect facade. The sound of Harrison dropping a heavy leather binder onto the table pulled me from my dark thoughts. He did not raise his voice, but the sheer command in his posture forced the officers to stop talking immediately. He spoke to them in flawless, commanding German, his tone brokering absolutely zero debate. While I could not understand every word, the impact was immediate and undeniable. The taller officer lowered his radio, his aggressive stance faltering under Harrison's icy stare. Harrison switched back to English, looking directly at the commanding officer. He explained that he had been sitting in the VIP lounge directly across from us. He detailed exactly how he watched the older woman deliberately spill her coffee and smoothly slide my leather tote bag under her own luggage cart while I was distracted. He admitted he had not realized the malicious intent at the time, assuming it was a simple mix-up among traveling companions, until he saw border control dragging me away from the departure gates. His lawyer produced a corporate guarantee document, a legally binding bond from one of the largest venture capital firms in Europe, officially taking full legal and financial responsibility for my presence in the country. The lawyer slapped the platinum-embossed bond down right over the holding cell paperwork. Harrison did not just offer an alibi. He essentially purchased my immediate freedom using corporate diplomatic immunity. The officers scrutinized the paperwork, their skepticism melting into reluctant deference. They realized they were no longer dealing with an undocumented stray, but a woman backed by immense institutional power. The taller officer finally nodded, sliding the detention forms into the trash. Harrison turned to me, offering his arm with a steady, reassuring grace. He guided me out of that suffocating interrogation room, leaving the stunned police officers behind. As the heavy doors closed, the reality of his intervention settled over me. He had just saved me from an international nightmare, setting the stage for a reckoning my family would never see coming. We walked briskly down the sterile corridor toward the tarmac. The transition from the claustrophobic interrogation room to the sprawling sunlit corridors of the private aviation terminal felt entirely surreal. Harrison's legal team moved with frightening efficiency, ruthlessly dismantling the bureaucratic red tape that had threatened to cage me just moments before. I watched his lead attorney hand over a series of stamped documents to a senior border official, speaking in rapid, hushed tones that immediately smoothed away any remaining friction. In less than 10 minutes, my status morphed from a detained, undocumented suspect into a highly protected VIP. Security doors that previously required multiple key cards and intense scrutiny swung open effortlessly at Harrison's mere nod. Staff members who had previously glared at me with deep suspicion now averted their eyes, stepping aside to let us pass. The sheer speed of this transformation sent my mind reeling. A profound psychological shock took root in my chest, battling against the heavy, suffocating numbness of my family's betrayal. How could the people who raised me leave me to rot in a foreign cell while a complete stranger utilized his immense power to pull me from the wreckage? A fierce, blinding anger began to burn through the fog of my despair. My parents and my sister had meticulously planned this entire setup. They had smiled at me over expensive airport lattes, clinked their glasses to family unity, and then coldly walked away, leaving me to the mercy of international immigration law. Every single step I took toward the exit fueled a growing, undeniable rage deep inside my core. My hands curled into tight fists inside my coat pockets. I was no longer just the quiet, discarded sister mourning the loss of a family bond. I was a professional who had been ambushed and stripped of my basic human rights by the very people I shared a last name with. Harrison walked slightly ahead of me, his posture exuding a calm, impenetrable confidence that anchored my racing thoughts. He did not ask if I was okay, sparing me the obligation of feigning fake strength. Instead, he simply cleared the path, shielding me from the lingering stares of the airport personnel. We bypassed the regular security checkpoints, completely stepping through a set of frosted glass doors that led directly out into the crisp, cool European air. The fresh wind hit my face, clearing the remnants of my panic and replacing it with pure, solid resolve. The roar of jet engines filled the expansive tarmac. Sitting prominently on the private runway was a sleek, pristine Gulfstream jet, its silver exterior gleaming under the afternoon sun. A flight attendant in a tailored uniform stood at the base of the descending stairs waiting to receive us. The wind whipped my hair across my face, biting into my cheeks, but the physical sensation only sharpened my focus. Harrison paused just before we reached the boarding stairs. He turned to face me, his dark eyes analyzing my expression with surgical precision. He did not offer empty platitudes or gentle words of comfort. He treated me like a peer, a fellow tactician standing on a hostile battlefield. I realized my existence had just become a high-stakes chess match. "What do you have that they want badly enough to strand you on another continent?" he asked, his voice cutting cleanly through the roaring engine noise. The question was sharp, direct, and completely devoid of pity. It demanded an immediate, rational assessment of a situation I had been viewing purely through the lens of emotional trauma. I stared at him, the harsh wind suddenly feeling completely irrelevant to my rapidly shifting mindset. My family did not just abandon me out of spite or petty cruelty. Spite would have been leaving me off a dinner reservation or excluding me from a holiday photo. Stranding someone in a foreign country without a passport or funds required severe premeditation and a massive appetite for extreme risk. They had committed a federal crime by stealing my identification and orchestrating my detention. People do not risk prison time simply because they find their daughter boring. They do it when they are desperate. They do it when there is a massive life-altering financial reward on the line. Harrison's question hit me like a runaway freight train. The devastating realization slammed into my chest, instantly replacing my lingering sorrow with absolute clarity. I was not just an inconvenience to their flashy lifestyle. I was an obstacle. This was never just a cruel prank born from petty childhood jealousy. It was a calculated tactical removal. They had engineered this nightmare to blindside me while they executed a massive theft back home, assuming my shock would keep me paralyzed and compliant. My mind raced through every interaction, every forced smile, and every suspicious conversation I had witnessed over the past few weeks. Jamal's sudden insistence on funding this European getaway. My father's unusual inquiries about my administrative roles. My mother's frantic attempts to ensure I brought my main work laptop on the trip. They needed me physically gone, completely unreachable, and legally incapacitated. I possessed something they desperately needed to access, and my presence in Chicago was the only thing standing in their way. As a forensic accountant, my entire career was built on following the money, uncovering the hidden motives behind illogical actions. The motive here was glaringly obvious. They needed absolute control over a financial asset I managed. I looked up at the Gulf Stream, the polished steps leading to a flying sanctuary of technology and secure communications. My grief completely evaporated, replaced by a singular burning focus. I had to access my digital financial records immediately. I had to see exactly what they were trying to steal while I was locked away in a German holding cell. I met Harrison's gaze, my posture straightening as the quiet, submissive sister died right there on the tarmac. I nodded once, a silent promise of retribution, and walked up the stairs of the jet, ready to tear their fraudulent empire apart. Stepping into the cabin of Harrison Tate's private Gulfstream was like crossing the threshold into an alternate universe. The heavy door sealed shut behind us instantly, silencing the roaring engines and replacing the chaotic tarmac with a cocoon of absolute tranquility. The interior was a masterclass in understated wealth. Plush cream-colored leather seats faced polished mahogany tables, and the ambient lighting cast a warm golden glow across the cabin. A crystal decanter of water and two heavy glass tumblers waited on the center console. The extreme luxury felt jarring against the raw, jagged edges of my current trauma. Just an hour ago, I was sitting on a metal chair in a sterile holding cell bracing for deportation and feeling entirely disposable. Now, I was wrapped in an environment designed to cater to the elite. I took a seat across from Harrison, sinking into the soft leather. I was still wearing the same clothes my mother had ruined with her perfectly timed coffee spill, but the stain no longer mattered. The physical discomfort was completely overshadowed by the burning need for answers. Harrison did not offer me a drink or ask how I was feeling. He simply reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a sleek matte black laptop. He slid it across the polished wood table toward me, followed by a small, heavy rectangular device. The laptop is military grade. He stated, his tone strictly business. It is fully encrypted and running through a dedicated satellite internet connection. No local networks, no firewalls, no digital footprint. You have completely unrestricted access to the global web, and absolutely no one can track your IP address from this cabin. Do what you need to do. I pulled the device closer to me, feeling the cool metal beneath my shaking fingertips. I opened the laptop and the screen flared to life, illuminating the cabin with a harsh bluish light. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a fraction of a second before muscle memory took completely over. I was no longer the discarded daughter. I was a senior forensic accountant, operating in my element. I bypassed the standard login screens, accessing a secure virtual private network that routed my connection through encrypted servers in Switzerland. I needed to get into my primary financial dashboard, but without my phone, for two-factor authentication, I had to rely on the emergency backdoors I had established years ago. I initiated a sequence of secure cloud backups, answering a rapid-fire series of complex security questions that only I knew. Within 3 minutes, the reinforced digital walls of my personal servers lowered. I navigated directly to the most critical asset I managed. My grandfather had been a shrewd, quiet man who saw right through my parents' reckless financial behavior. Before he passed away, he established a $4 million irrevocable trust. He specifically bypassed my mother and father entirely, naming me as the primary administrative trustee. I controlled the disbursements, the investments, and the overarching security of that massive fund. My family knew the money existed, but they legally could not touch a single cent without my explicit verified authorization. I pulled up the primary ledger, my eyes scanning the rows of data with practiced precision. Forensic accounting is not just about reading numbers. It is about identifying anomalies, spotting the subtle deviations that signal a breach. I checked the transaction history for the past 48 hours. My heart slammed against my ribs as a massive red flag appeared on the screen. The secure system, which had remained dormant for months, suddenly displayed an aggressive flurry of recent activity. Multiple failed login attempts had been registered from an IP address in Chicago, followed by a successful bypass protocol initiated just hours after my flight to Europe had taken off. They had breached the outer firewall. I dug deeper into the audit logs, tracing the exact sequence of commands. Whoever was on the other end had spent the entire time I was in the air dismantling the secondary security measures. My breath caught in my throat as I reached the core financial hub. The money was no longer sitting safely in the secure holding accounts. The system displayed a massive pending wire transfer request designed to drain the entire $4 million trust in a single, devastating sweep. The funds were currently in a mandatory holding pattern waiting for the final international clearing cycle to complete. Attached to the bank request was a heavily encrypted PDF file. I downloaded the document and threw it onto the main screen. It was a formal power of attorney. The legal language was thick and aggressively drafted, explicitly claiming that I was currently unreachable abroad and utterly incapable of managing my financial duties. The document authorized full administrative control to be immediately transferred to my father, Gregory, and my brother-in-law, Jamal. They had forged my signature at the bottom, perfectly mimicking the slight slant of my handwriting. The trap was so much darker and far more sinister than I had ever imagined. They had not just stolen my passport to ruin a vacation. They had meticulously orchestrated my international detention to establish a verified paper trail of my absence. By stranding me in Europe without identification or a phone, they created the exact emergency scenario required to activate the forged legal documents. The German authorities holding me incommunicado would serve as their ultimate alibi. While I was rotting in a holding cell fighting just to prove my basic identity, they were back in Chicago, liquidating my grandfather's entire legacy. This was not just a petty family squabble or a moment of toxic favoritism. This was a highly coordinated multi-million-dollar heist. They had planned to steal my entire future, leaving me destitute and trapped in a foreign legal system. They wanted me completely erased from society permanently. The absolute magnitude of their betrayal settled into my bones, turning my lingering sorrow into pure, unadulterated, unforgiving ice. I did not waste another second staring at the forged signature. My hands flew across the keyboard, executing a series of aggressive diagnostic protocols to trace the exact destination of the pending $4 million wire transfer. As a forensic accountant, I knew that financial criminals rarely moved stolen funds directly into a personal checking account. They needed a labyrinth to wash the money. I initiated a deep dive sequence into the routing numbers attached to the forged bank request. The digital trail initially pointed to a seemingly innocuous corporate holding account based in New York, but I pushed harder, bypassing the basic banking interfaces and stripping away the routing layers one by one. The New York account was just a dummy terminal, an empty shell designed to bounce the transaction. The real destination lay hidden behind a complex web of corporate shields. I tracked the final destination to a cluster of limited liability companies recently incorporated in the state of Delaware. Delaware is notorious for its corporate secrecy laws, making it the perfect haven for hiding stolen assets from a casual observer. But my family had made a fatal error. They severely underestimated my level of professional access to federal registry databases. I ran a comprehensive cross-reference search on the registered agents and the hidden executive officers of those specific limited liability companies. The screen rapidly populated with the official incorporation documents. The primary managing directors for every single shell company were listed clearly in black and white. My brother-in-law Jamal and my sister Brittany. They had established these dummy corporations less than 3 weeks ago. The timeline aligned perfectly with the day Jamal suddenly offered to pay for our supposed European family reconciliation trip. They had spent weeks carefully building the buckets to hold my stolen money, ensuring the funds would be immediately washed and untraceable by the time I managed to contact a lawyer or the American authorities. Every single keystroke revealed the shocking depth of their coordinated attack. They were not just stealing my grandfather's legacy. They were actively laundering it through a sophisticated domestic network. The sheer audacity of their plan was staggering, but their execution was incredibly arrogant. They left a massive digital footprint, assuming I would never be in a position to look for it. I extracted the raw IP logs associated with the creation of the shell companies. The digital fingerprints pointed directly to the IP address of Jamal's home office in Chicago. He had literally engineered my financial ruin while sitting at the custom mahogany desk my parents had bought him as a wedding gift. I downloaded every piece of this metadata, creating an unassailable evidentiary chain. Harrison watched my frantic typing with quiet, analytical admiration. He leaned back in his leather seat, his eyes tracking the reflection of the financial data scrolling rapidly across my face. He finally broke the silence, asking why a supposedly wealthy, successful investment banker like Jamal would resort to executing federal wire fraud and identity theft against his own family member. I did not stop typing as I explained the toxic reality of my sister and brother-in-law. Jamal was severely over-leveraged. His entire flashy lifestyle, the luxury sports cars, the bespoke designer suits, the endless country club tabs was a complete illusion. It was built entirely on massive high-interest credit card debt and incredibly risky margin loans that were currently imploding. He was bleeding cash daily just to maintain the fake image of a titan of industry. And Brittany absolutely refused to downgrade her extravagant lifestyle. She threw absolute fits if she could not buy the latest seasonal designer collections or host lavish, heavily catered parties for her shallow social circle. My parents eagerly enabled this shared delusion. They constantly praised Jamal's fake success, while aggressively ignoring the glaring financial red flags I had tried to point out for years. Jamal was drowning in debt, facing imminent professional and personal ruin. My $4 million trust fund was their ultimate desperate bailout. To them, my money was just sitting there wasted on a boring accountant. They chose to permanently sacrifice my freedom and completely destroy my future, rather than face the public humiliation of losing their fake elite status. I was the collateral damage required to keep their pathetic debt-ridden fantasy alive. They felt completely justified in ruining my life to save theirs. I shifted my focus back to the banking portal, checking the exact timestamp on the pending transfer. The international wire was scheduled to clear its final security protocol in exactly 12 hours. I glanced at the flight tracking data on my secondary screen. 12 hours was precisely when my family's return flight was scheduled to land at Chicago O'Hare International Airport. The timing was sickeningly poetic. They planned to step off the plane, turn on their phones, and see $4 million safely deposited into their fraudulent shell accounts, all while believing I was locked in a German detention center without a voice. My initial instinct was to hit the cancel button to immediately block the transfer and securely lock down the trust fund. But my hand paused over the trackpad. If I canceled the transaction right now, Jamal would instantly receive a banking alert. He would know I had somehow escaped the airport trap and accessed the secure network. He would immediately begin covering his tracks, deleting the shell companies, and destroying the digital evidence of the forged documents. I could not let that happen. Simply stopping the theft was not enough anymore. I needed them to feel completely safe. I needed them to fully execute their criminal plan and incriminate themselves beyond any shadow of a reasonable doubt. I had to let the wire fraud progress to the point of no return. I had to let them hang themselves with their own greed. I turned away from the banking portal and reached for the satellite phone Harrison had placed on the table. The heavy device felt cool and unfamiliar, but I knew exactly how to utilize its encrypted tethering capabilities. I connected the satellite phone directly to the military-grade laptop, bridging a secure, completely untraceable network tunnel that bypassed standard commercial servers. This specific configuration guaranteed that my digital location would remain completely masked, showing only a generic, randomized European routing node. Jamal was arrogant, but he still had access to corporate tracking tools. If he saw an IP address pinging from a private Gulfstream jet traveling at high altitude across the Atlantic Ocean, he would immediately know his grand plan had been compromised. I opened a fresh, highly secure incognito browser window and navigated to my encrypted personal email account. I bypassed 3 separate layers of biometric security and specialized authentication tokens memorized specifically for absolute emergencies. The inbox loaded slowly, pulling the required data through the heavy encryption tunnel. Right at the top of my primary inbox sat a single unread message. The sender name was Jamal, and the subject line was left entirely blank. The timestamp showed it had arrived exactly 10 minutes after my family's connecting flight had departed the runway from Frankfurt. It was a meticulously pre-scheduled automated email. Jamal had drafted this toxic message back in Chicago, set a timer on his outbox, and allowed his corporate server to dispatch it while he was comfortably sitting in a first-class cabin over the ocean. He had precisely calculated the moment I would be sitting in an airport security room begging for access to a computer to contact my family. He wanted the message waiting for me the second I managed to log online. My finger hovered over the trackpad. Opening this email meant initiating direct contact with the person who had just tried to destroy my life. It meant looking straight into the dark abyss of my family's betrayal. Harrison watched me in absolute silence, respecting my process. The hum of the jet engines provided a steady rhythm to my racing thoughts. I took a slow, steady breath, forcing my heart rate to normalize. I clicked the subject line, and the message expanded across the wide screen. I stared blankly at the bright pixels on the monitor. The text on the bright screen was brief, stark, and dripping with an almost unbelievable level of toxic arrogance. Jamal did not bother with fake pleasantries. He wrote with the absolute certainty of a man who truly believed he held all the power. Clara, the email began. By now you have probably realized we have your passport, your phone, and your wallet safely with us on the flight back to Chicago. Do not bother causing a massive scene with the German police. They will not help an undocumented foreigner with absolutely no money. Attached to this email, you will find a set of digital equity release forms for your grandfather's trust. Sign them immediately using your secure electronic signature. Once I receive the digital confirmation that you have relinquished full administrative control to your father and me, I will wire $5,000 to a Western Union location near the airport so you can survive the week. I will also mail your physical passport directly to the United States Embassy in Berlin. If you refuse or if you try to delay the transfer process in any way, we will block your return entirely. You can live on the dirty streets of Frankfurt for all we care. Do not even think about calling mom or dad for a rescue. They fully authorize this plan. Brittany needs a new house, and your stagnant, boring lifestyle is holding this family back from our true potential. Sign the documents, Clara. It is time you finally contributed to this family. I read the vicious words, letting the sheer audacity of his demands wash over my consciousness. Jamal was explicitly committing federal extortion in writing. He was openly admitting to the intentional theft of my federal identification documents. He was holding my American citizenship and my basic freedom hostage in exchange for a $4 million ransom. The $5,000 bribe he offered was a pathetic insult, a tiny crumb thrown to a starving dog. He truly believed I was weak enough to fold under the immense pressure, signing away my grandfather's entire legacy just to secure a cheap economy ticket back home. But the most devastating part of the email was not Jamal's criminal arrogance. It was the explicit written confirmation that my own parents, Patricia and Gregory, had actively endorsed my total destruction. Mom and Dad fully authorized this plan. Those 8 words shattered the final fragile thread of familial loyalty I had been desperately clinging to for my entire adult life. I had spent decades trying to prove my worth to them, foolishly hoping my quiet stability and professional success would eventually earn their genuine respect. Instead, they had viewed my existence as a convenient piggy bank, waiting for the perfect moment to smash it open and hand the pieces to their favorite daughter and her flashy husband. A cold, absolute, and unforgiving calm settled deeply over my mind. The suffocating grief and the frantic confusion that had paralyzed me in the interrogation room evaporated completely, leaving behind a sharp tactical clarity. They had drawn the battle lines assuming I was unarmed and completely defenseless. They thought they had successfully isolated a weak, compliant victim who would simply surrender her assets out of fear. They did not realize they had just handed a seasoned forensic accountant a signed, digitally traceable written confession of international wire fraud and federal extortion. The gloves were officially and permanently off. I was no longer fighting for their elusive approval. I was fighting for my survival, and I was finally going to tear their fraudulent empire apart, brick by brick, until absolutely nothing remained. I shifted the heavy military-grade laptop slightly across the polished mahogany table, angling the bright screen so Harrison could view the extortion email in its entirety. He leaned forward, his sharp dark eyes scanning the vicious text I had just received. He read the cruel ultimatum, the brazen admission of passport theft, and the terrifyingly confident demand for a $4 million digital signature. His gaze tracked down the screen, absorbing every detail with the detached, analytical focus of an apex predator assessing a wounded asset. However, as his eyes reached the bottom of the message landing squarely on the sender's full name and corporate signature block, his entire demeanor shifted instantly. Harrison froze. The subtle, relaxed posture he had maintained since we boarded the Gulf Stream vanished, replaced by an intense, rigid stillness. He did not say a word. He simply reached down into his heavy leather briefcase and retrieved an ultra-thin platinum tablet. His fingers tapped rapidly across the glass screen, effortlessly bypassing his own complex layers of biometric security. The warm ambient lighting of the cabin reflected off the tablet as he navigated through a highly restricted internal database belonging to his venture capital firm. I watched in absolute silence as he pulled up a massive, meticulously designed digital portfolio. It was a high-stakes investment pitch deck. He expanded the primary title page, and my breath caught sharply in my throat. The corporate logo emblazoned across the center of his tablet was an almost flawless exact match to the logo in Jamal's email signature. Harrison slowly scrolled through the executive summary, his eyes darting rapidly between the ambitious financial projections on his device and the blatant extortion threats glowing on my laptop. He quickly cross-referenced the Delaware shell company names I had uncovered during my deep forensic audit with the proposed corporate holding structures carefully listed in the pitch deck. A slow, chilling realization settled heavily over the quiet cabin. The billionaire venture capitalist sitting directly across from me was not just a random wealthy stranger who had incidentally witnessed a toxic family dispute at an airport lounge. He was the direct, unwitting catalyst for the entire criminal operation my family had just executed against me. Harrison placed his tablet on the table right next to my laptop, aligning the two screens perfectly. He looked at me, and the expression on his face was a terrifying mixture of deep professional insult and lethal cold calculation. Jamal had not just attempted to completely rob his own sister-in-law. He had unwittingly attempted to aggressively use the stolen trust funds to directly defraud one of the absolute most ruthless private equity investors in the entire financial sector. Harrison tapped the glossy screen of his tablet, highlighting a specific paragraph buried deep within the financial covenants of the pitch deck. Your brother-in-law has been desperately courting my venture capital group for the past 6 months. Harrison explained, his voice dropping to a remarkably low, dangerous timbre. He is begging for a massive $50 million capital injection to save his severely over-leveraged real estate portfolio from total irreversible collapse. He is bleeding out financially just as you originally suspected, but my firm requires extremely rigorous due diligence before we ever authorize that level of corporate funding. I leaned in closely, reading the highlighted text. It detailed a strict liquidity requirement. Jamal needed to prove he possessed substantial, unencumbered liquid assets to mitigate our severe investment risk, Harrison continued. I gave him a hard, non-negotiable deadline. He had to demonstrate exactly $4 million in verifiable cash reserves by tomorrow morning to pass our final corporate compliance check. If he fails to show the money, we walk away forever, and his entire fraudulent empire implodes by the end of the week. The twisted, ugly, and undeniably cruel reality of my family's deliberate betrayal finally made absolute complete sense. Jamal did not actually want to keep my grandfather's trust fund to buy Brittany a new house. The $4 million was merely a temporary prop. He needed to steal my money quickly, wash it through those newly registered Delaware shell companies overnight, and proudly present it to Harrison's compliance officers tomorrow as his own legitimate proof of liquidity. He was deliberately leveraging my stolen inheritance to illegally secure a massive $50 million corporate bailout. My parents had ruthlessly sacrificed their own daughter at an international airport terminal just to help their beloved golden child-in-law perpetrate a massive federal financial fraud against a billionaire. Jamal thought he had brilliantly engineered the perfect, untraceable crime. He wrongly assumed I would be permanently silenced in a cold, unforgiving German holding cell, completely unable to stop the pending international wire transfer before his extremely crucial funding meeting. A cold, razor-sharp smile slowly spread across Harrison's face. The sheer blinding arrogance of this man foolishly attempting to use laundered, violently extorted family funds to pass my strict compliance protocols is a completely fatal miscalculation. We looked at each other, the vibrant hum of the jet engines underscoring the magnitude of the moment. We both instantly and clearly realized the massive, unprecedented power we now held. We did not just have the ability to cancel a wire transfer and stop a simple theft. We possessed the digital keys and the corporate leverage to legally, financially, and professionally obliterate Jamal and every single family member who had enabled him. We can easily let him think he has officially won, I stated firmly, my voice devoid of any lingering hesitation. We let him walk into his celebration tonight, believing the money is absolutely secure. Harrison extended his hand across the table, his dark eyes gleaming with absolute predatory intent. I will totally destroy his firm, and you will rightfully destroy his freedom, he promised. I grasped his hand tightly, confidently, sealing a ruthless, unbreakable alliance right there in the open sky, directly above the dark rolling waves of the vast Atlantic Ocean. I pulled my hand back from Harrison's tight grip and immediately turned my attention back to the military-grade laptop resting on the mahogany table. The glow of the screen illuminated the dark cabin. It was time to give Jamal exactly what he wanted. Or rather, exactly what he thought he wanted. Financial criminals always possess a fatal flaw, and for my brother-in-law, that flaw was his towering unearned ego. He fully expected me to shatter into pieces. He anticipated a desperate, weeping response from the weak, boring sister-in-law who had always bowed her head submissively at family dinners. I had spent 33 years perfecting the role of the quiet scapegoat, and now I was going to use that exact persona as a lethal weapon. I placed my fingers over the keyboard and began to type. I stripped away every ounce of my professional confidence and channeled the terrified, abandoned woman they believed they had left behind in Germany. I deliberately made my sentences fragmented and frantic. I intentionally misspelled a few words to simulate panic and tears blurring my vision. "Jamal, please," I typed, making sure the raw desperation bled through the digital text. "I am so scared. The border police just left me in a holding room. It is freezing here, and I have absolutely no money. Why did Mom and Dad leave me? Please do not let them deport me or put me in a camp. I will do whatever you want. Just please help me get home." I read over the pathetic words. It was a masterpiece of manufactured vulnerability. Harrison leaned over his eyes, scanning the drafted message. A dark, appreciative smirk touched the corners of his mouth. He recognized the strategy immediately. We were feeding Jamal a steady diet of absolute power, inflating his bloated ego so completely that he would ignore basic legal precautions. Jamal needed to feel like a conquering king. He needed to believe that his brilliant airport heist had successfully broken my spirit. By giving him this pathetic, weeping surrender, I was ensuring he would drop his guard completely. He would be so drunk on his perceived victory that he would fail to scrutinize the highly specific legal trap I was about to lay underneath my pleading words. I took a deep breath, preparing to add the lethal finishing touches to the message. Now came the most critical part of the operation. As a forensic accountant, I had spent years analyzing corporate fraud cases, dissecting the exact elements federal prosecutors needed to secure a conviction. Extortion and wire fraud are incredibly specific crimes under strict federal law. To guarantee Jamal and my father would face mandatory federal prison sentences, I needed airtight, indisputable proof of coercion crossing international lines. The evidence had to be explicitly documented in writing by the victim and actively acknowledged by the perpetrator. I positioned my cursor at the bottom of the email and carefully crafted the exact phrasing required by the Department of Justice. "I am only signing this because you are withholding my passport and stranding me," I typed, ensuring the sentence stood out clearly from the previous rambling paragraph. "I do not want to give up my grandfather's trust fund, but I am signing the digital equity release forms solely because you are holding my identification hostage in Chicago and refusing to let me travel. Please just send the $5,000 and mail my passport to the embassy like you promised so I can survive." It was a textbook legally binding definition of extortion under duress. By stating clearly that the only reason for the financial transfer was the theft of my federal identification and the threat of foreign stranding, I legally nullified the transaction while simultaneously locking Jamal into a federal crime. If he replied to this email and accepted the terms, he was officially committing wire fraud across international borders, utilizing electronic communications to execute a multi-million-dollar extortion plot. I read the entire message one last time. It was a flawless digital snare wrapped in the illusion of a desperate surrender. My heart maintained a steady, cold rhythm. I moved the cursor over the send button. I did not hesitate. I clicked the trackpad, sending the encrypted data packet soaring up to the satellite and straight down into Jamal's corporate inbox in Chicago. We did not have to wait long. Less than 4 minutes later, a sharp ping echoed through the quiet cabin of the Gulf Stream. A new message appeared in my secure inbox. Jamal was so blinded by his greed and his desperate need to secure Harrison's $50 million capital injection that he had replied almost instantaneously. He did not consult his legal team. He did not pause to analyze my phrasing. He just saw the finish line and sprinted directly over the steep cliff without a single second thought. I opened his reply. Attached to the message were the final forged transfer documents requiring my digital authentication. His response was brief, dripping with the toxic, arrogant triumph of a man who believed he had just successfully conquered the world. The money will be wired to the Western Union. The second your signature clears the system, Jamal wrote, completely validating the extortion exchange. Your passport goes in the mail tomorrow. Glad you finally learned your place. I stared at that final, mocking sentence. He had just handed me a signed, federally admissible confession. He confirmed possession of my stolen passport and linked its return directly to the fraudulent financial transaction. The hook was set deep in his jaw. I looked up at Harrison, the glow of the laptop reflecting in my eyes. The trap had snapped shut and my family was officially out of time. I shifted gears, minimizing the extortion email and opening a direct communication channel to my private wealth management team in New York. As the primary administrative trustee, I had established a multi-tiered security protocol for exactly this kind of catastrophic breach. I quickly typed a rapid sequence of commands into the terminal, bypassing the standard banking interface and accessing the raw mainframe of the financial institution. I needed to execute a maneuver known in the forensic accounting world as a silent hard freeze. If I simply blocked the transaction outright, Jamal would receive a failure notification from the clearinghouse. He would know I had survived the airport trap and immediately scramble to destroy his digital paper trail. Instead, I had to construct a financial mirage. I engaged a specialized federal holding protocol. To Jamal, watching his screen in Chicago, the $4 million wire transfer would appear completely successful. The money would seem to leave my grandfather's trust and land directly inside his newly registered Delaware shell accounts. The banking portal would generate a legitimate-looking confirmation receipt, inflating his arrogant certainty that he had won. In reality, the funds would never actually touch his accounts. The money would be diverted mid-transfer, dropping into an impenetrable federal escrow vault. It would hang in a state of suspended animation, frozen by a high-level security lock that only federal authorities and I could release. I typed out a secure directive to my senior wealth manager in New York, authorizing the silent freeze and appending the digital extortion files I had just secured. The wealth manager confirmed the protocol activation within seconds. The $4 million shifted from my grandfather's trust, passing through the outer firewalls before plummeting safely into the digital fortress I had just erected. The system flashed a green confirmation light, signaling that the decoy receipt had been successfully dispatched to Jamal's server. He was now holding a worthless digital receipt, completely unaware that he had just locked himself inside a federal financial trap. I leaned back heavily against the plush leather seat of the private jet, feeling the adrenaline hum through my veins. The technical execution was flawless. The massive sum of money was now absolutely safe, and the criminals were completely blind to their impending doom. I watched the encrypted data packets finalize their routing. My hands stopped shaking as I reviewed the executed commands. The sheer power of digital finance was absolute, and I wielded it with a precision my family could never even comprehend. They treated me like a naive child playing with a calculator, fundamentally misunderstanding that I controlled the very architecture of their financial reality. The silent freeze was now fully operational, securing my grandfather's legacy and setting the stage for total retaliation. Harrison watched me close the terminal, his dark eyes studying my face with a mixture of professional respect and deep curiosity. He asked how a family could be so blindly confident that I would simply surrender. I looked out the window at the dark ocean below, the hum of the aircraft filling the silence. I calmly explained that my parents, Patricia and Gregory, had spent decades meticulously gaslighting me into believing I was utterly powerless. They constructed a reality where my sister Brittany was the shining star, while my existence was merely a tolerated burden. I recalled a specific Thanksgiving dinner just last year. Patricia had cornered me in the kitchen while Jamal and Brittany laughed in the dining room. My mother had looked at my simple dress with pure disdain and told me, "You are 33 alone and boring. You should be grateful we let you sit at the table." She delivered those words with a casual cruelty that was designed to break my spirit and keep me entirely submissive. They believed that because I chose not to parade my accomplishments or wear flashy designer labels, I possessed absolutely no leverage in the real world. But they completely misunderstood my silence. I took every insult, every dismissive glance, and every cruel remark, and I channeled that intense rejection directly into my career. While they spent their days drowning in high-interest debt to impress their shallow country club friends, I was quietly amassing real wealth and untouchable power. I had built a formidable reputation as a forensic accountant, handling sensitive financial investigations for major corporate entities. I owned properties, controlled massive investment portfolios, and wielded influence they could never fathom. I allowed them to believe I was weak because my anonymity was my greatest asset. My parents and Jamal never bothered to look beneath the surface. They foolishly mistook my profound self-control for absolute weakness, completely unaware that they were aggressively poking a sleeping dragon. Harrison absorbed the explanation, a slow, predatory smile touching his lips. He understood the absolute beauty of the impending destruction. He reached into his tailored jacket pocket and pulled out his highly secured mobile device, instantly connecting it to the jet's encrypted satellite network. The trap was perfectly set on the financial side, but now we urgently needed the physical enforcement. He placed a direct call to the regional director of the Securities and Exchange Commission, quickly outlining the massive wire fraud attempt aimed at his venture capital firm. Next, he dialed a strictly private number for his highest executive contact at the Federal Bureau of Investigation, specifically targeting the white-collar crime division stationed directly in Chicago. He forwarded the undeniable digital evidence I had just captured, including Jamal's extortion email and the forged power of attorney documents. Harrison gave short, precise commands, formally authorizing federal agents to intercept the criminals based on his corporate standing and my rock-solid forensic data. The coordination between us was completely ruthless and terrifyingly efficient. We were not just flying back to Chicago. We were bringing a massive, undeniable federal hammer directly down on their heads, ready to crush their fraudulent reality. As Harrison ended the secure calls to the federal authorities, a heavy, anticipatory silence filled the cabin of the Gulfstream. The legal machinery was now fully in motion, completely unstoppable, and aimed directly at Chicago. I turned my attention back to the military-grade laptop resting on the mahogany table. While the federal agents were mobilizing on the ground, I needed to know exactly what my targets were doing at this very second. I utilized the jet's high-speed satellite internet to open a secure, untraceable browser window. I navigated straight to my sister's public social media profiles. Brittany was violently addicted to external validation. I knew with absolute certainty that she would be incapable of keeping her supposed massive financial victory a secret from her superficial followers. I bypassed her carefully curated grid of heavily edited vacation photos and immediately noticed the pulsing red ring around her profile picture, signaling an active live stream broadcast. I clicked the icon, instantly pulling up the live video feed. The high-definition screen filled with the opulent, familiar interior of the Chicago O'Hare International Airport first-class lounge. They had just landed safely on American soil and immediately headed straight for the VIP section to celebrate. I watched the live broadcast with clinical detachment, analyzing their movements through the crisp video feed. Brittany held her smartphone high above her head, capturing the perfect angles of the exclusive lounge. Her perfectly styled hair and expensive designer travel outfit looked completely pristine, showing absolutely zero signs of the long international flight. She panned the camera around the lavishly decorated private suite, making sure her thousands of followers could clearly see the premium leather seating and the exclusive top-tier catering spread laid out on the marble counters. The sheer narcissism on display was sickeningly predictable. They had just successfully executed what they believed was a multi-million-dollar heist, abandoning their own flesh and blood in a foreign detention center, and their very first instinct upon landing was to immediately broadcast their unearned wealth to the entire world. I reached out and slowly turned up the volume on my laptop, allowing their voices to fill the quiet cabin of the private jet. I needed to hear exactly how they were framing this moment. The crisp audio of popping corks and loud, obnoxious laughter erupted from the laptop speakers. Jamal stood at the center of the frame holding a massive, ridiculously expensive bottle of vintage champagne. He wore a smug, victorious grin that made my blood run absolutely cold. He popped the cork with a theatrical flourish, earning a round of applause from my parents, who were sitting comfortably on a plush velvet sofa just behind him. Brittany flipped the camera to show her own radiant, heavily filtered face. Below the video, her pinned caption read exactly as I expected. Cheers to new beginnings and massive real estate acquisitions. #blessed. #family first. The sheer, unadulterated hypocrisy of that hashtag was physically nauseating. They had literally just discarded me like human garbage at a German terminal gate, yet they were sitting in a luxury airport lounge, proudly presenting themselves as the ultimate tight-knit American family. Jamal poured the bubbling champagne into 4 crystal flutes, handing them out with the exaggerated swagger of a conquering king. My father Gregory took his glass and clapped Jamal firmly on the shoulder, his face glowing with deep, genuine pride. This was the exact look of parental approval I had spent 3 decades desperately trying to earn through hard work and absolute loyalty. My father was freely giving it to a man who had just committed federal wire fraud. Patricia, my mother, leaned into the frame holding her crystal flute high. She looked completely unburdened, entirely stripped of the fake tense anxiety she had displayed while orchestrating the coffee spill back in Europe. She laughed brightly, her diamond earrings catching the overhead lounge lights. To the future, my mother declared loudly, her voice practically vibrating with pure greed. Jamal raised his glass to the camera, looking directly into the lens. To clearing out the dead weight and securing the bag, he added smoothly. They all clinked their glasses together in a sickeningly joyful toast. They were literally drinking to my complete demise. They were celebrating the destruction of my life, utterly convinced that the $4 million was safely sitting in their fraudulent Delaware shell accounts. They felt entirely invincible, entirely untouchable. Watching them revel in my supposed destruction was surreal. They had no idea that the money they were toasting to was locked in a federal vault, or that the FBI was currently preparing their arrest warrants. I stared at the bright screen, my eyes locking onto my mother's brilliantly smiling face. For a fleeting fraction of a second during the long flight over the dark Atlantic Ocean, a tiny, deeply buried part of my inner child had wondered if they felt even a single ounce of genuine remorse. I had briefly questioned if putting my own parents in federal prison was too extreme a response to their actions. But watching Patricia gleefully sip premium champagne purchased with my stolen future, every single drop of residual guilt evaporated into absolute nothingness. The toxic, suffocating familial bond that had chained me to their selfish expectations snapped permanently. I felt absolutely nothing for them anymore. No anger, no crippling sadness, no lingering hesitation. There was only a cold mechanical drive for absolute devastating justice. I reached forward and firmly pressed the laptop closed, instantly cutting off their obnoxious laughter and plunging the aircraft cabin back into quiet sophistication. The glowing screen went completely black. I looked directly across the cabin at Harrison, my posture perfectly rigid and my mind entirely clear. The time for hiding in the shadows was over. It was time for war. The slight shift in cabin pressure signaled our initial descent into Chicago airspace. I glanced through the thick oval window as the aircraft banked sharply, revealing the illuminated grid of the city below. Somewhere down there, my family was toasting to my absolute destruction. A sharp chime from Harrison's encrypted communication console pulled my attention back. His lead attorney was transmitting the final batch of legal deliverables. The sheer velocity at which Harrison's resources operated was entirely terrifying. In the span of a transatlantic flight, his corporate legal team had successfully petitioned a federal judge, leveraging his immense institutional power and my airtight digital evidence to bypass weeks of standard bureaucratic delays. The high-resolution printer secured in the aircraft console hummed to life, smoothly ejecting thick watermarked documents. Harrison gathered the fresh pages and spread them out across the mahogany table. I read the bold federal headers with profound satisfaction. We now possessed a verified, heavily enforced judicial injunction permanently freezing all assets connected to Jamal and Brittany. Right beneath that lay the ultimate prize: fully executed federal arrest warrants for Jamal and my father, Gregory. The charges were meticulously detailed, citing international wire fraud, felony extortion, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. There would be no lengthy investigations or preliminary hearings required to secure their detention. The digital trail I captured had been so flawlessly incriminating that federal prosecutors instantly recognized a slam-dunk conviction. The FBI white-collar crime unit was already mobilized on the ground, coordinating directly with Harrison's private security detail to execute the takedown. The flight attendant moved through the cabin, quietly securing the loose items as the descent steepened. I watched the sprawling infrastructure of the city rush up to meet us, feeling an intense, burning anticipation. They genuinely believed I was shivering in a German holding cell, begging for a $5,000 bribe just to survive. Instead, I was descending upon their city with the full devastating force of the United States federal justice system backing my every move. The aircraft engines whined louder as we broke through the thick cloud cover. The sheer contrast between their delusional celebration and the brutal reality rapidly approaching them was incredibly satisfying. I watched the towering skyscrapers of downtown Chicago come into sharp focus, knowing I was holding all the keys to their imminent downfall. The battlefield was completely set as I looked down at my rumpled, travel-worn clothing. The dark coffee stain my mother had deliberately splashed across my blouse served as a pathetic reminder of the weak, compliant daughter they expected to easily crush. I could not possibly walk into this highly anticipated confrontation looking like a defeated, exhausted traveler. I needed to project absolute power. As if reading my exact thoughts, the flight attendant approached our table quietly. She informed me that the jet was fully equipped with a curated executive wardrobe for emergency business engagements. She guided me toward the spacious marble-lined lavatory at the rear of the aircraft and opened a cedar closet filled with high-end designer garments. I bypassed the conservative muted colors I normally wore to family events. I reached for a razor-sharp, impeccably tailored black suit crafted from heavy Italian wool. It exuded a lethal, uncompromising authority. I stripped off the stained blouse and stepped into the crisp, perfectly structured garments. The transformation was immediate. The tailored lines of the suit acted as psychological armor, pulling my shoulders back and forcing my posture into total command. I stood before the brightly lit vanity mirror and stared at my reflection. The quiet, boring sister who desperately sought her parents' approval was completely gone. I pulled my hair back tightly, securing it into a sleek, severe style that left absolutely no room for softness. I opened the vanity drawer and found a collection of unopened cosmetics. I bypassed the subtle neutral shades my mother had always insisted I wear to avoid outshining my sister. Instead, I selected a bold, unapologetic shade of dark red lipstick. I applied it with steady, deliberate precision. The vibrant color felt like war paint. I looked at the woman in the mirror and felt a deep, powerful surge of adrenaline. My reflection confirmed what my family had fatally ignored. I was never the weak link. I was a senior forensic accountant armed with federal warrants, and I was about to annihilate the people who thought I was completely disposable. I stepped out of the lavatory and walked confidently back down the aisle of the jet. The high-end fabric of the suit moved flawlessly with me, completely reinforcing my absolute resolve. Harrison looked up from the federal legal documents as I approached. A flicker of deep, genuine respect crossed his features as he took in my complete visual transformation. "You are ready," he stated simply. I took my seat directly across from him, my hands resting calmly on the table. He leaned forward to outline the exact sequence of upcoming events. "We are not just going to hand these warrants over quietly to local police." Harrison explained, his tone strictly tactical. "Jamal and your parents derive their entire self-worth from their public image. We are going to hit them exactly where it hurts the most. Their massive, highly fragile ego." He tapped the glowing screen of his tablet, which displayed Jamal's current tracking data. Jamal had just booked the center table at the most exclusive Michelin-starred restaurant in downtown Chicago to loudly flaunt his supposed financial victory. Harrison detailed the final strike plan. We would walk directly into that restaurant alongside federal agents. We would not yell or cause a chaotic emotional scene. We would simply utilize the sheer crushing weight of public humiliation. We were going to strip them of their stolen wealth, their freedom, and their carefully curated high society reputation, all at the exact same moment. The Gulfstream touched down on the private runway with a smooth, heavy thud, the engines roaring in reverse thrust, before settling into a steady hum. I unbuckled my seatbelt and stood up, smoothing the sharp lines of my tailored suit. The cabin door opened, letting in the brisk, biting chill of the Chicago night. Stepping out onto the metal stairs, I looked over the sprawling private aviation tarmac. Waiting for us just beyond the perimeter of the runway was a formidable fleet of 3 black, heavily tinted SUVs. The imposing vehicles idled quietly in formation, their bright headlights piercing the thick evening fog. This was not a standard airport pickup. This was a highly coordinated federal strike team preparing to deploy into the city. I descended the stairs with Harrison walking right beside me, the crisp wind failing to pierce the heavy Italian wool of my new armor. As our feet hit the concrete, 2 figures detached themselves from the deep shadows of the lead vehicle. They wore sharp, nondescript suits that screamed absolute government authority, their postures rigid and hyper-alert. They approached us with synchronized precision. Harrison stepped forward to meet them, extending a firm hand. The taller of the 2 agents returned the greeting, his intense gaze briefly flicking toward me with silent acknowledgement. Tucked tightly under his left arm were 2 thick, glaringly red folders. Even from a few paces away, I could clearly see the official federal seals stamped across the front covers. Those folders held the active federal warrants we had strategically secured while crossing the Atlantic Ocean. They contained the legally binding ruin of the arrogant men who had planned to steal my future. The second agent opened the heavy rear door of the primary SUV, gesturing respectfully for us to enter. The sheer gravity of the moment settled over the cold tarmac. These agents were not here to negotiate or ask polite questions. They had been thoroughly briefed on the blatant extortion, the forged signatures, and the massive international wire fraud. They had reviewed the irrefutable digital evidence I had meticulously gathered from the sky. My toxic family thought they were brilliant criminal masterminds operating entirely above the law. They had absolutely no idea they had just triggered a massive federal response that was currently surrounding them. I slid into the luxurious leather interior of the vehicle, the armored door shutting behind me with a solid, echoing thud. The physical isolation of the cabin perfectly mirrored the inescapable legal trap my family had just blindly walked into. We were locked, loaded, and fully authorized to proceed. I immediately opened my military-grade laptop and rested it securely on my knees as the SUV engine revved to life. While the FBI agents possessed their own formidable surveillance tools, I needed absolute real-time financial precision. As a forensic accountant, I had long ago memorized the intricate digital architecture of Jamal's financial life, back when my parents naively insisted I review his portfolio to learn how real money worked. I accessed a secure, encrypted monitoring portal, tapping directly into the routing signals of his primary credit accounts. The streaming data refreshed instantly. A bright green alert flared on my high-definition screen, indicating a massive pre-authorization charge that had just successfully cleared the banking network. I rapidly traced the merchant identification number, and a grim, highly satisfied smile touched my lips. Jamal had just opened a colossal open tab at L'Etoile, one of the most ultra-exclusive, notoriously expensive Michelin-starred restaurants located right in the heart of downtown Chicago. It was exactly the kind of pretentious high-visibility venue he strongly preferred when he wanted to aggressively flaunt his fabricated wealth. He was likely treating my parents and Brittany to a wildly extravagant dinner, loudly toasting to the successful funding he firmly believed he had just secured from Harrison's venture capital firm. He was carelessly charging thousands of dollars in premium vintage champagne and imported caviar to a credit card that was already buckling under the tremendous weight of his hidden corporate debt. Absolutely certain that my stolen $4 million would easily cover the balance by morning. The sheer blinding arrogance of choosing a crowded, highly public venue to celebrate a massive federal felony was astounding. He desperately wanted a captivated audience for his grand triumph. He actively craved the envious stares of the elite diners surrounding his lavish table. I relayed the precise geographic location to Harrison and the federal agent sitting in the front seat. The lead agent nodded once, rapidly tapping the address into their encrypted communication network. Jamal wanted a spectacular public show for his victory lap. We were about to give him a brutal performance he would never forget. The convoy of black SUVs pulled away from the private terminal, merging seamlessly onto the busy highway leading toward the gleaming heart of the city. We moved through the heavy traffic with aggressive, unstoppable momentum. The bright neon lights of Chicago bled through the dark-tinted windows, washing the quiet interior of our vehicle in shifting shades of electric blue and crimson. The vibrant, chaotic energy of the metropolis buzzed all around us, significantly heightening the intense, electric anticipation building inside the cabin. I sat perfectly still in the back seat next to Harrison, watching the towering glass skyscrapers loom larger against the dark night sky. My heartbeat remained incredibly steady, pulsing with a cold, rhythmic precision. There was absolutely no fear left in my system, no lingering anxiety about confronting the greedy people who shared my bloodline. The emotional manipulation they had consistently weaponized against me for decades had been completely neutralized by the undeniable clarity of their criminal betrayal. Harrison looked out the window, his posture relaxed, but highly alert, radiating the quiet, dangerous confidence of a man entirely accustomed to executing high-level corporate takedowns. My mind was razor-sharp, actively organizing the exact sequence of devastating events that would unfold the very second we breached the restaurant doors. Every single variable had been carefully calculated, every possible exit firmly blocked. As our vehicle swiftly exited the highway and turned onto the affluent downtown streets, the glittering marquee of the targeted restaurant came into clear view. The final stage of their total destruction was officially underway. Inside the opulent dining room of L'Etoile, the atmosphere buzzed with the quiet, expensive hum of Chicago's ultra-elite. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over velvet-upholstered booths and pristine white tablecloths. The air smelled of seared Wagyu black truffles and the heavy, unmistakable scent of imported cigars. Nestled directly in the center of the room, occupying the most coveted and highly visible table in the entire establishment, sat my family. They were a portrait of arrogant triumph. Jamal held court at the head of the table, his posture radiating the inflated confidence of a man who believed he had just conquered the financial world. He leaned back in his plush leather chair, casually puffing on a thick, premium cigar that violated the restaurant's strict indoor smoking policy, a rule the management clearly ignored for someone flashing that level of fabricated wealth. He was laughing loudly, the booming sound carrying across the refined dining space, drawing irritated but submissive glances from the neighboring tables. To his right sat my father Gregory. Gregory leaned forward, his face flushed with premium wine and unadulterated admiration. He raised his crystal glass, offering a sickeningly loud toast to the man who had just orchestrated my complete abandonment in Europe. I watched through this towering glass facade of the restaurant as my father patted Jamal firmly on the broad shoulder, declaring him the absolute savior of the family legacy. He looked at Jamal with a level of deep, unconditional pride he had never once directed toward me. He openly praised the investment banker as the brilliant, ambitious son he had always desperately wanted. My mother Patricia sat adjacent to them, nodding enthusiastically while inspecting the massive diamond ring on her finger, undoubtedly planning her next reckless shopping spree. And there was my sister Brittany, draped in a sparkling designer gown that screamed new money. She was holding a flute of ridiculously expensive vintage champagne, looking around the room to ensure everyone was properly observing their extravagant celebration. They looked like royalty, completely intoxicated by their own perceived invincibility. They were completely unaware that the money fueling their lavish feast was currently locked in a federal vault, and the very foundation of their fraudulent empire was about to be ripped out from underneath them. The heavy glass doors of the restaurant swung open as our coordinated group breached the entrance. The sudden influx of cold night air caught the immediate attention of the front desk staff. The impeccably dressed maitre d' stepped forward quickly, his face arranged in a mask of polite but firm customer service. He held up a manicured hand, attempting to intercept our advance, stating that private events required a reservation and requesting that we wait in the marble foyer. We completely ignored him. Harrison did not even break his stride, simply maintaining his forward momentum with the terrifying grace of a billionaire accustomed to walking through locked doors. The two plainclothes federal agents flanked us flawlessly, their imposing physical presence and sharp, uncompromising stares instantly neutralizing any further protests from the restaurant staff. The maitre d' stumbled backward instinctively, recognizing the lethal, unyielding authority radiating from our tight formation. We moved as a singular destructive force, cutting directly through the main dining room. My tailored Italian wool suit felt like an impenetrable suit of armor every single step, amplifying the cold, calculated rhythm of my heartbeat. I kept my head held high, my dark red lipstick framing a perfectly neutral, chilling expression. The transformation in the room was spectacular to witness. The quiet hum of elite conversations began to falter, rippling outward from our trajectory like a heavy stone dropped into a still pond. Wealthy patrons paused mid-sentence, their silver forks hovering above their porcelain plates. Waiters froze in the aisles, stepping back to press themselves against the wood-paneled walls to grant us unhindered passage. The sheer aggressive gravity of our approach sucked the oxygen out of the room. It was not just the presence of a well-known venture capitalist like Harrison Tate. It was the undeniable reality that we were marching with absolute targeted purpose. The clinking of fine silver and the soft background jazz faded into a thick, suffocating silence. We were a dark storm rolling over a perfectly manicured lawn, and the entire restaurant held its collective breath, eagerly anticipating the imminent lightning strike. We navigated the narrow pathways between the velvet booths, our eyes locked squarely on the center table. Despite the sudden oppressive silence settling over the expansive dining room, my family remained entirely engrossed in their own boisterous celebration. Jamal was mid-laugh, raising his cigar to emphasize another boastful remark. It was Brittany who noticed the drastic shift in the atmosphere first. She paused her manicured preening and glanced over Jamal's broad shoulder, annoyed by the sudden lack of ambient noise. Her eyes swept casually across the luxurious room before slamming directly into my gaze. The transition was instantaneous and brutal. The smug, self-satisfied glow on her perfectly contoured face vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated terror. Her jaw went completely slack. The delicate crystal flute of $2,000 vintage champagne slipped right through her trembling fingers. The glass plummeted toward the ground, shattering violently against the polished marble floor. The sharp, explosive crack of the breaking crystal echoed like a gunshot through the dead silent restaurant. The golden liquid splattered across the hem of her expensive designer gown. Jamal, Gregory, and Patricia immediately snapped their heads around to follow her horrified stare. Their triumphant smiles melted into masks of absolute paralyzing dread. The discarded, boring sister. They thought they had securely locked away in a foreign country, had just arrived at their victory dinner. Patricia was the first to break the paralyzed tableau. A lifetime of country club conditioning and an absolute obsession with maintaining her social image forced her body into motion before her brain could fully comprehend the disaster standing before her. She leaped up from the plush velvet booth, her face completely drained of color. Her hands fluttered wildly in the air as she plastered on a frantic, heavily manufactured smile of maternal relief. She pitched her voice to a theatrical, breathy octave designed specifically for the neighboring tables to hear. "Clara, oh my God, you missed the flight. We were so worried about you," Patricia cried out, stepping forward with her arms outstretched, as if moving in for a desperate, loving embrace. "We searched the entire terminal. We thought you had wandered off and gotten lost. Why did you not call us?" The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking. She delivered the lines with the desperate, panicked energy of a cornered animal trying to gnaw its way out of a trap. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply stood my ground, letting her approach until she was inches away, forced to confront the absolute freezing void in my eyes. The fake smile on her face began to tremble. Her outstretched arms slowly dropped to her sides, as the reality of my tailored suit, the bold red lipstick, and the towering federal agents flanking me finally registered in her mind. This was not the broken, compliant daughter she had left crying at Gate 24. I reached into the thick red folder in my hand. I pulled out the crisp, high-resolution printouts of the digital extortion emails Jamal had sent me just hours prior. I stepped past my mother, completely ignoring her pathetic performance, and moved directly to the center of the table. I slammed the stack of papers down onto the pristine white tablecloth with a violent echoing thud. The force of the impact rattled the crystal glassware and sent a fresh spray of spilled vintage champagne splashing across the glossy pages. "We were so worried," I repeated, letting the words hang in the tense air, my voice cutting through the dining room like a surgical blade. "Is that what you call a coordinated theft of my federal identification documents? Because right here in black and white, your golden son-in-law explicitly states that you and Dad fully authorized my abandonment. He clearly details the ransom for my passport and the forced liquidation of a $4 million trust." Patricia let out a strangled gasp, her hands flying to cover her mouth. Gregory stared at the printed documents, his eyes bulging as he recognized the undeniable corporate letterhead and Jamal's electronic signature. The physical evidence of their massive federal felony was now sitting in plain sight, completely exposed under the bright chandeliers of the restaurant. Brittany shrank back into the booth, her hands gripping the edge of the table as if trying to merge with the upholstery. She stared at the papers, her carefully curated reality shattering into pieces. The facade of the innocent, blessed family was actively burning to the ground, and Patricia's desperate gaslighting attempt had failed spectacularly. The entire restaurant watched in captivated silence as the illusion of their wealth and status collapsed. Jamal abruptly pushed his heavy chair back. The wood scraped loudly against the marble floor. He stood up to his full towering height, utilizing his size in a blatant attempt to physically intimidate me. His chest puffed out and his jaw locked tightly with aggressive, seething fury. For years, this exact posturing had worked to silence anyone who dared question his authority within our family. He stepped around the table, deliberately closing the distance between us until he loomed directly over my shoulder. He intended to use his corporate boardroom bullying tactics to crush my defiance. "You are making a massive scene, Clara," Jamal growled. His voice was kept low, vibrating with venomous threat designed to force my compliance without causing a larger public disturbance. "You are clearly having some kind of mental breakdown. Pick up this garbage and go wait outside by the valet before I call restaurant security to have you dragged out of here. We will deal with your delusions in private." He reached out, attempting to snatch the printed extortion emails off the damp tablecloth to hide the evidence. I swiftly placed my hand flat over the papers, pinning them securely to the table. I tilted my head up, meeting his furious, burning glare with absolute, unbreakable resolve. A slow, terrifyingly cold smile curved my lips. The power dynamic had permanently shifted, and he was too arrogant to realize he was already a dead man walking. "Call them Jamal," I challenged, my voice ringing out, clearly echoing off the high ceilings of the dining room. "Call the security guards right now. Let us see exactly who they decide to escort out tonight. The woman possessing federal warrants or the fraudulent investment banker currently drowning in millions of dollars of hidden margin debt." Jamal froze. The veins in his thick neck bulged as the insult landed. He tightened his fists, his breathing turning ragged and heavy. He was completely unaccustomed to facing direct, unapologetic resistance, especially from the sister-in-law he considered an easy target. He opened his mouth to deliver another vicious threat, preparing to unleash his full rage. Before Jamal could form a single hostile syllable, the imposing figure standing silently just behind my right shoulder took a deliberate step forward. Harrison Tate moved out from the periphery and stepped directly into the bright, illuminated center of the confrontation. The overhead chandelier light caught the sharp, tailored lines of his expensive suit and the cold, unyielding calculation in his dark eyes. Jamal turned his head to confront the newcomer. The aggressive, threatening scowl on his face evaporated in an instant. The transition was absolute and catastrophic. Jamal recognized the billionaire venture capitalist immediately. This was the exact man holding the keys to the $50 million capital injection Jamal desperately needed to survive. This was the titan of industry he had been relentlessly begging for a financial bailout. Every single drop of blood completely drained from Jamal's face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. His broad shoulders slumped, and the aggressive bravado holding him upright shattered instantly. He stumbled backward, his knees hitting the edge of the dining chair. He suddenly realized that the woman he had just tried to rob and abandon was standing shoulder to shoulder with the most powerful investor in the city. The trap had closed. Jamal's mouth opened and closed like a suffocating fish. He scrambled to reconcile the terrifying reality standing in front of him. The swaggering bully, who had just threatened to have me dragged out by security, completely vanished. In his place stood a desperate, sweating man watching his entire fabricated universe crumble. He wiped his clammy palms on his tailored trousers and forced his facial muscles into a grotesque, panicked approximation of a respectful business smile. He took a shaky step forward, extending a trembling hand toward the billionaire venture capitalist. "Mr. Tate," Jamal stammered, his voice cracking violently under the immense pressure. "I had absolutely no idea you were in Chicago tonight. What a tremendous, unexpected honor. If you had informed my office, we could have prepared a proper reception for you. I assume you are here to finalize the details of our upcoming capital injection." The desperation in his tone was pathetic. He was actively trying to ignore the federal agents, the spilled champagne, and the printed evidence of his crimes sitting right on the table. He desperately hoped he could somehow schmooze his way out of a federal trap by playing the role of a confident peer. Harrison did not take the extended hand. He did not return the frantic smile. Instead, he simply raised one hand, his palm facing Jamal, in a gesture of absolute, uncompromising dismissal. The simple motion carried so much heavy, undeniable authority that Jamal instantly snapped his mouth shut, his outstretched arm dropping uselessly to his side. The entire dining room watched in captivated silence as the billionaire dismantled the fraudulent banker without breaking a sweat. "I received your highly ambitious investment pitch deck yesterday morning," Jamal Harrison stated, his voice ringing with a cold, surgical precision that cut through the heavy silence of the restaurant. "I reviewed your extensive claims of immense liquid capital and your aggressive projections for real estate market dominance. It was quite a compelling piece of creative fiction." Jamal swallowed, hard beads of cold sweat forming along his hairline. He tried to interrupt, to spin another web of corporate lies, but Harrison stepped closer, completely invading his physical space. And just a few hours ago, Harrison continued, his dark eyes locking onto Jamal with lethal intensity. I also received the explicit, highly documented extortion email you sent directly to my most trusted colleague and senior forensic accountant, Clara. You attempted to use laundered, violently extorted family funds to pass my strict compliance protocols. You tried to use her stolen inheritance as your fake proof of liquidity. You brazenly believed you could rob a brilliant financial investigator, leave her stranded in a foreign detention facility, and then use her own money to secure a $50 million partnership with my firm. Harrison added, his tone laced with absolute disgust. Your arrogance is only exceeded by your breathtaking stupidity. Jamal began to shake uncontrollably. He looked frantically at Gregory, who was gripping the edge of the table as if the floor had suddenly dropped out from underneath him. Patricia let out another high, strangled gasp, finally understanding the catastrophic magnitude of the man standing beside me. They had blindly assumed I was a nobody, but I was standing under the direct protection of a financial titan. You are completely finished in this city, Jamal Harrison announced, projecting his voice so every wealthy patron in the surrounding booths could hear the execution. And you are permanently finished in this industry. I do not do business with desperate, over-leveraged criminals who steal from their own family members. Harrison reached into his tailored jacket pocket and pulled out his encrypted mobile device. He held the glowing screen up so Jamal could clearly read the federal confirmation receipts displayed across the monitor. Before I even boarded my jet to fly here tonight, I personally forwarded every single digital record of your documented wire fraud and your explicit extortion threats directly to the enforcement directors at the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, Harrison stated ruthlessly. I also sent the complete unredacted file to the regional director of the Securities and Exchange Commission. Your professional licenses have already been suspended pending emergency review. The words struck Jamal like physical blows. He staggered backward, hitting the velvet booth. Your $50 million capital injection is dead. Harrison continued hammering the final nails into Jamal's corporate coffin. Your firm will be officially blacklisted by every major banking institution in the country by tomorrow morning. Your creditors will immediately call in all of your massive margin loans the second the markets open. You have absolutely no money, you have no professional future, and your fraudulent empire is officially obliterated. The sheer totality of his professional destruction hung heavily in the dining room. Jamal had spent his entire adult life aggressively climbing the corporate ladder using lies and manipulation, and Harrison had systematically dismantled his entire career in less than 2 minutes. The remaining physical strength completely abandoned Jamal's large frame. He sank heavily into his dining chair, his chest heaving as he began to hyperventilate. His eyes darted wildly around the restaurant, searching for an escape that simply did not exist. The crushing weight of his monumental failure finally broke him. He buried his face deep in his trembling hands, letting out a loud, pathetic, suffocating wheeze. Seeing her husband entirely destroyed and realizing her luxurious lifestyle was evaporating before her very eyes, Brittany snapped. She shot up from the velvet booth, her face twisted into a mask of pure, ugly rage. The spilled vintage champagne dripped unnoticed down her expensive designer gown as she lunged aggressively toward me. You ruined everything. Brittany began to scream, her shrill voice shattering the last remaining shreds of their high society dignity. You are completely ruining my husband's life. We just needed a little bit of money to save the business, and you had to destroy us. You always have to ruin absolutely everything for me, you jealous, bitter, pathetic loser. I watched my sister unravel her pristine image, dissolving into the entitled reality I had always known. I did not raise my voice or even look at her. Instead, I turned my attention directly to the man sitting frozen beside her. My father had spent my entire life dismissing my intelligence, brushing off my career as a boring clerical job while elevating Jamal as a financial genius. He eagerly signed his name to my destruction. I leaned over the table, placing both hands firmly on the damp, champagne-soaked tablecloth. Gregory shrank into the tufted leather of the booth. He looked absolutely terrified, his eyes darting frantically toward the exit, searching for a way out of the suffocating trap he had helped build. Did you really think a forensic accountant would not notice a forged power of attorney? I asked, my voice deadly calm and perfectly clear. Did you honestly believe you could execute a massive, highly illegal federal wire transfer right past the primary administrative trustee without triggering a single security protocol? You always treated me like I was stupid, Dad. You thought I was just a naive girl playing with spreadsheets. But I build digital fortresses for a living. I catch sophisticated corporate criminals before breakfast. You and Jamal left a digital trail so wide and so painfully obvious that a first-year accounting student could have tracked you down in minutes. You literally handed me the exact evidence I needed to lock you both away for a very long time. Gregory opened his mouth desperately trying to formulate a defense, but his voice completely failed him. The reality of his colossal mistake was crashing down on him. He had traded his freedom for the illusion of wealth, foolishly trusting a son-in-law who was drowning in margin debt. At that precise moment, the two imposing men who had escorted Harrison and me through the restaurant doors finally stepped out from the shadows of the foyer. They moved with a synchronized heavy authority that instantly commanded the attention of every single patron in the dining room. They bypassed the stunned waiters and positioned themselves squarely on either side of my family's table. Reaching into their tailored suit jackets simultaneously, they flipped open their leather credentials. The silver shields glinted under the crystal chandeliers. Federal Bureau of Investigation, the lead agent announced, his deep voice carrying a terrifying, uncompromising weight that silenced the entire room. Nobody move. The lead agent kept his eyes locked strictly on the men seated at the table. Jamal and Gregory, you are both formally under arrest, he declared, reciting the words with a cold, practiced efficiency that made the reality of the situation absolutely undeniable. You are being charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud, federal extortion, and the manufacture of fraudulent legal documents across international lines. Jamal let out a pathetic gasp. His large frame trembled violently as he tried to push himself deeper into the corner of the velvet booth, desperately attempting to distance himself from the agents. This is a massive misunderstanding, Jamal pleaded, his voice breaking into a humiliating squeak. I am a respected investment banker in this city. You cannot do this to me here. We can clear this all up at my office tomorrow morning. Please just let me make a phone call to my legal team. The second agent did not waste a single breath indulging the pathetic negotiation. He stepped forward quickly, grabbing Jamal by the shoulder and forcibly hauling the towering man up from his seat. Turn around and place your hands behind your back, the agent commanded, spinning Jamal around and pressing him firmly against the edge of the dining table. The metallic, heavy click of federal handcuffs ratcheting tightly around Jamal's wrists echoed sharply across the silent restaurant. Gregory did not offer any physical resistance. The fight had completely drained out of my father the second he saw the silver badges. He stood up slowly, his legs visibly shaking beneath him. He looked old, incredibly frail, and utterly defeated. The lead agent secured my father's wrists behind his back with the same brutal mechanical efficiency. The entire Michelin-starred restaurant sat in absolute captivated shock. Wealthy socialites, influential politicians, and prominent corporate executives watched in stunned fascination as the golden child's arrogant husband and the proud family patriarch were restrained like common criminals right in the middle of their lavish victory dinner. Diners at the adjacent tables abandoned their expensive meals, shifting in their seats to get a clearer view of the spectacular downfall. The heavy, humiliating reality of federal custody had officially invaded their exclusive, untouchable world. Jamal wept openly as the agents patted him down thoroughly, stripping him of his expensive personal belongings. His watch and cufflinks were confiscated and shoved into clear evidence bags. The public spectacle was simply too much for my mother to handle. Patricia, a woman who had spent her entire existence meticulously curating a flawless, snobbish social reputation, let out a piercing, hysterical wail. She scrambled backward against the booth, throwing her hands over her face in a frantic attempt to hide from the devastating public scrutiny. But the damage was already done. All around the upscale dining room, dozens of high-definition smartphone cameras were raised in the air, recording every single humiliating second of the raid. The elite patrons of Chicago were eagerly capturing the absolute destruction of my family's fake empire. The footage would be circulating through every exclusive country club and private social circle before the night was over. Patricia sobbed uncontrollably, curling into a tight ball as the bright camera flashes illuminated her complete disgrace. Brittany slumped onto the floor beside the shattered champagne glass, weeping loudly as she watched her husband being hauled away by federal agents. In a matter of seconds, their carefully constructed, arrogant reality was completely annihilated, leaving behind nothing but the pathetic, shameful wreckage of their own suffocating greed. The federal agents tightened their grip on the handcuffs, ignoring the pathetic whimpers escaping Jamal's throat as they forcibly marched him and my father toward the glowing exit signs of the restaurant. The heavy thud of their expensive leather shoes against the marble floor served as a brutal, rhythmic countdown to their permanent loss of freedom. As the men were led away, the blinding flashes of smartphone cameras continued to illuminate the dining room, capturing every agonizing second of their public humiliation. Patricia watched her husband and her prized son-in-law being hauled out like dangerous criminals, her eyes wide with a frantic, unhinged desperation. The absolute destruction of her pristine, carefully curated social status was finally too much for her fragile ego to process. Her legs gave out completely. She collapsed, her knees slamming painfully against the hard floor. The elegant, poised matriarch who had spent her entire life looking down her nose at anyone she deemed inferior was suddenly crawling through spilled wine and shattered crystal. She lunged forward, her shaking hands desperately grabbing at the hem of my tailored wool trousers. Her face was streaked with running mascara, her perfectly coiffed hair falling into a messy, chaotic tangle around her tear-stained cheeks. She looked absolutely wretched, entirely stripped of the haughty arrogance she had worn like a crown just 20 minutes prior. "Clara, please!" Patricia wailed, her voice cracking as she sobbed loudly enough for the entire restaurant to hear. "You have to stop them. You have the power to fix this. Tell Mr. Tate to call off the agents. Tell the authorities it was all just a massive misunderstanding over the trust fund documents. You cannot send your own father to federal prison. You cannot destroy your sister's husband. Family does not do this to family." She tugged at my pant leg, looking up at me with a pathetic, begging expression that turned my stomach. She was actively utilizing the very concept of family as a manipulative weapon, completely ignoring the fact that she had gleefully discarded our biological connection the moment it became financially inconvenient for her. She cried and pleaded loudly, begging for a mercy she had entirely refused to show me when I was terrified, isolated, and begging for help in a foreign country. The sheer blinding hypocrisy of her desperate plea echoed through the silent dining room, hanging heavily in the tense atmosphere. I looked down at the weeping woman clutching my ankles. I felt absolutely no pity, no lingering affection, and certainly no obligation to save her from the devastating consequences of her own blinding greed. I did not step back, but I also did not offer her a single ounce of comfort. I simply stared at her with a gaze so incredibly cold and devoid of emotion that she instinctively loosened her frantic grip on my clothing. "You want to talk to me about family?" I asked, my voice slicing through her hysterical sobbing with lethal, absolute precision. Family does not intentionally steal a passport to lock their own flesh and blood in a foreign detention center. Family does not demand a $4 million ransom in exchange for a flight home. Family does not abandon their daughter at gate 24 with $200 and steal her entire future just to fund a fraudulent lifestyle. I leaned down slightly, ensuring my words pierced directly through her frantic panic. "You smiled at me in the airport lounge, Mom. You offered to hold my bag with a bright, loving smile while you were actively planning to completely erase my existence. You poured yourself a glass of $2,000 champagne tonight and happily toasted to my absolute destruction. The family you are desperately crying about right now does not exist. That family died the exact moment you walked onto that plane and left me behind." Patricia flinched violently as if I had physically struck her. She opened her mouth to argue, to offer another pathetic, fabricated excuse about how they were just trying to secure Brittany's future, but the unyielding ice in my expression silenced her completely. She finally realized that the quiet, submissive daughter she had bullied and manipulated for 33 years was permanently gone. I was no longer the convenient scapegoat, willing to absorb their toxic abuse to keep the peace. I was the architect of their total downfall. You made your choice when you decided Jamal's fake wealth and Brittany's mansion were more valuable than my freedom. I continued, my tone completely merciless. You chose to commit federal wire fraud and international extortion. You gambled my life to save yourselves, and you lost everything. The federal agents are not a misunderstanding. They are the direct, unavoidable consequence of your own criminal greed. I will not lift a single finger to stop them. You and Dad are going to face the justice system, and you will do it without a single dime of my grandfather's money to protect you. Patricia slumped against the base of the velvet booth, her desperate sobs dissolving into a hollow, defeated wail. Brittany remained curled on the floor beside her, completely paralyzed by the catastrophic ruin of her entire privileged reality. I stood perfectly upright, smoothing the front of my designer jacket. I reached into my pocket and retrieved the tightly folded wad of currency Patricia had shoved into my hands right before she abandoned me in Germany. I tossed the crumpled bills onto the champagne-soaked tablecloth, letting them land directly beside the printed evidence of their federal crimes. To help with the bill, I stated, my voice echoing clearly across the hushed, captivated dining room. I turned my back on the pathetic wreckage of my former family. Harrison immediately fell into step beside me, his presence a solid, reassuring wall of power and respect. Together we walked purposefully toward the front entrance. The sea of wealthy patrons parted instantly, stepping aside to grant us an unobstructed path to the exit. I kept my head held incredibly high, my posture radiating absolute, unbreakable victory. Behind me, the miserable sounds of my mother and sister sobbing loudly filled the restaurant, a fitting soundtrack to my ultimate liberation. The heavy glass doors of the restaurant swung shut behind me completely, severing the miserable sounds of my mother and sister sobbing loudly amidst the wreckage of their shattered lives. I stepped out into the crisp, freezing Chicago air, taking a deep, cleansing breath. The next 7 days moved with a terrifying, unrelenting speed that only the federal justice system can truly muster when handed a perfectly assembled forensic portfolio. My grandfather's $4 million trust was permanently secured behind a multi-layered biometric vault, officially untouchable to anyone but me. I watched the court proceedings from the secure gallery with total clinical detachment. Jamal stood before the federal magistrate, completely stripped of his bespoke Italian suits, wearing a standard-issue bright orange correctional jumpsuit. The heavy chains around his waist and wrists clinked loudly, a harsh sound that echoed through the quiet courtroom. His high-priced defense attorney argued desperately for his immediate release, citing his deep ties to the local community and his previous standing as a prominent investment banker. The federal prosecutor simply presented the undeniable digital logs I had recovered from the Gulfstream jet. The prosecutor detailed exactly how Jamal had aggressively established multiple anonymous shell companies in Delaware within the last month, explicitly designed to launder stolen international funds. The judge took one look at the sheer scale of the digital wire fraud and deemed Jamal an extreme flight risk. Bail was immediately and decisively denied. The arrogant man who had loudly bragged about commanding millions was remanded to a heavily secured federal holding facility, entirely stripped of his freedom and his oversized ego. He looked back at the gallery, his eyes wide with absolute terror, finally realizing that no amount of smooth talking could save him from a mandatory federal sentence. My father Gregory faced a similarly brutal reality. He had foolishly assumed his advanced age and his previous standing in the affluent country club circuit would somehow shield him from the harshest legal consequences. The federal authorities absolutely did not care about his golf handicap. Because he had willingly signed the forged power of attorney and actively conspired to execute the international extortion, the government moved swiftly to freeze his entire financial portfolio. Heavily armed agents arrived at my parents' pristine suburban estate at dawn, executing a comprehensive audit of every single asset they owned. They systematically seized his retirement assets, pension accounts, and lucrative investment portfolios to cover massive federal fines and mandatory restitution orders. The luxurious, carefree retirement my parents had felt so incredibly entitled to enjoy was completely annihilated. Patricia was forced to desperately contact cut-rate real estate agents to list their sprawling home at a massive loss just to keep them from drowning in mounting legal fees. Their entire financial foundation had crumbled into dust within a single week. The absolute collapse of Jamal's fraudulent firm triggered an instantaneous catastrophic chain reaction that hit my sister with devastating force. Brittany had built her entire identity around the illusion of endless wealth, completely ignoring the toxic mountain of margin loans keeping her afloat. Without Jamal's illegal income stream to service their staggering debt, her pristine, highly curated lifestyle evaporated almost overnight. I received the brutal updates directly from the public bankruptcy filings. The bank dispatched aggressive process servers to her massive, heavily mortgaged mansion, serving her with immediate foreclosure notices. She had to stand on her manicured front lawn weeping and completely helpless as ruthless repo men loaded her two luxury sports cars onto flatbed tow trucks. The expensive diamond jewelry she loved to flaunt online was forcefully seized by court order to satisfy the angry creditors swarming her estate. The golden child who had happily agreed to strand me in Germany so she could buy a new vacation home was abruptly left with absolutely nothing. Her shallow social circle, the very people she desperately wanted to impress, completely blacklisted her. The wealthy friends who had eagerly commented on her boastful airport live stream suddenly refused to answer her frantic phone calls. They treated her like a highly contagious disease, terrified that associating with the wife of a convicted federal fraudster would completely ruin their own pristine reputations. She was entirely isolated, forced to pack a few remaining suitcases and move into a cheap, cramped apartment, using the last of her depleted credit. The glamorous, untouchable reality she had violently tried to steal from me was completely gone. She was forced to face the exact type of terrifying financial ruin she had so callously wished upon me at Gate 24. She had no employable skills, having spent her entire adult life relying on the stolen achievements of others. The harsh reality of having to find a minimum wage job just to feed herself finally shattered the fragile delusion that she was inherently superior to everyone else. In stark contrast to my family's total destruction, my professional trajectory skyrocketed with unprecedented momentum. The financial sector is an incredibly tight-knit community, and news of the high-profile takedowns spread rapidly through the corporate grapevines. Industry leaders quickly learned that it was my precise, aggressive forensic accounting that had single-handedly dismantled Jamal's sophisticated fraud ring before he could infect other vulnerable firms. My independent agency was suddenly flooded with high-value consultation requests from major international banking institutions. Chief executive officers and corporate boards sought my exact expertise to ruthlessly audit their own internal security measures. Harrison Tate's venture capital firm officially retained my services as their primary external auditor, securing a multi-million-dollar annual contract that solidified my financial empire. The very analytical skills my parents had constantly mocked as boring and unglamorous had officially established me as one of the most feared and deeply respected financial investigators in the entire country. My career was flourishing beyond my wildest expectations. I had transformed the deepest betrayal of my life into the ultimate professional victory, proving that genuine competence will always utterly obliterate flashy, arrogant deception. Exactly 30 days had passed since the federal authorities dismantled my family's fraudulent facade. I was sitting at the sprawling Quartz Island in my newly acquired downtown penthouse, reviewing a quarterly financial audit for a major tech client. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, catching the steam rising from my espresso. My encrypted personal phone vibrated against the sleek stone surface. I glanced at the glowing screen, noting a message from an unfamiliar, unregistered burner number. I unlocked the device, fully expecting a frantic text from a junior analyst regarding the upcoming earnings report. Instead, the words that materialized on the screen pulled me back into the toxic gravity I thought I had permanently escaped. The message was incredibly long, completely devoid of any basic grammar, and dripping with the exact type of desperate weaponized guilt my mother had perfected over 3 decades. Clara, please do not delete this. The message began aggressively demanding my attention from the very first syllable. It is your mother. The bank took absolutely everything from us. Brittany and I are living in a filthy, roach-infested motel on the outskirts of the city. We have absolutely nothing to eat today. Gregory is in a federal holding facility, and they froze the last of my emergency credit cards this morning. We are going to be living on the actual streets by tomorrow afternoon if we do not pay the daily room rate. You have millions of dollars sitting safely in your accounts. You just signed that massive corporate contract everyone is talking about on the financial news. You have more money than you could ever possibly spend. Please, Clara, do not be cruel. We are starving and terrified. You have to help your family. I read the frantic, rambling text message twice, analyzing the sentence structure with the same detached clinical precision I applied to corporate fraud ledgers. Patricia was still desperately attempting to play the ultimate victim. Even after orchestrating a highly illegal international extortion plot, even after completely abandoning her own flesh and blood in a foreign holding facility, she fundamentally believed she was the one being unfairly persecuted. She did not offer a single word of genuine apology for the horrific trauma she had intentionally caused me. There was no recognition of the federal crimes she had actively conspired to commit. She only cared about her own immediate physical discomfort. She felt entirely entitled to the very same wealth she had ruthlessly tried to steal from me just 1 month ago. Her sheer, blinding audacity was almost scientifically fascinating to witness a true testament to her bottomless delusion. I looked up from the glowing screen of my phone and let my gaze sweep across the pristine, quiet elegance of my luxury penthouse. The panoramic view of the Chicago skyline spread out before me, a breathtaking testament to the untouchable security I had built entirely on my own. I smiled coldly at the screen, recognizing that my financial and emotional independence was now completely unshakable. I searched my heart, digging deep into my chest for any lingering trace of maternal obligation or familial guilt. There was absolutely nothing. The frantic, weeping woman sitting in a squalid motel room completely lacked the power to manipulate my emotions anymore. Reading her desperate plea did not trigger a sudden, overwhelming urge to rescue her from the devastating consequences of her own blinding greed. It only provided me with a profound, unbreakable sense of final closure. The toxic, suffocating chain that had bound me to their constant need for unearned salvation was permanently severed. I picked up the phone, my fingers completely steady. I did not need to draft a long, emotionally charged paragraph defending my right to peace. I did not need to explain the brutal irony of her current situation. The absolute best response to a narcissist demanding unearned mercy is complete dismissive apathy. I thought back to the horrific moment at the airport, recalling the exact, devastating cruelty they had shown me when I was at my absolute lowest point. I channeled the precise dismissive energy my family had weaponized against me when they stole my passport and walked away. I tapped the keyboard, crafting a response that contained exactly 4 words. I am busy. Try Uber. I stared at the short, razor-sharp message on the screen. It was the exact phrase they had used to casually dismiss my basic survival. I hit send, watching the small delivery icon confirm that the message had successfully reached her burner phone. The profound satisfaction that washed over me was incredibly pure and absolutely resolute. The second the delivery confirmation appeared on my screen, I navigated straight to my device settings and permanently blocked the burner number. I did not wait to see if Patricia would reply with another round of hysterical manufactured tears. I immediately opened my secure laptop and sent a priority directive to my legal team. I instructed them to comprehensively update all of my personal and medical directives. I legally completely removed Patricia Gregory and Brittany from every single emergency contact list, hospital authorization form, and next of kin registry associated with my name. I constructed a flawless legal firewall that guaranteed they could never make a medical or financial decision on my behalf, even in the event of a catastrophic emergency. They were officially and legally stripped of any remaining ties to my existence. I closed the laptop and took a slow, deep sip of my hot espresso. The morning sun felt incredibly warm against my skin. I was completely unburdened, breathing freely for the first time in my entire 33 years. I had completely erased them from my reality, stepping firmly into a future where their toxic shadows could never reach me again. I set my empty espresso cup on the marble counter of my penthouse and gathered my legal documents ready to head to the office. The transition from my private sanctuary to my corporate headquarters felt seamless, a daily reminder of the untouchable empire I had meticulously constructed. 30 minutes later, I was sitting behind the massive obsidian desk in my corner suite, leaning back into the ergonomic leather of my chief executive chair. The expansive floor-to-ceiling windows framed the breathtaking Chicago skyline perfectly. The bright morning light bounced off the towering steel and glass monoliths, perfectly mirroring the brilliant, unyielding clarity in my own mind. I watched the entire city move far below me, a bustling grid of massive commerce and intense ambition, and allowed myself a long moment of profound reflection. The most horrific betrayal of my entire existence had not been a tragedy at all. It had been a violent, absolutely necessary awakening. The universe had violently stripped away the toxic illusions binding me to my family, forcing me to finally step out of the shadows and fully claim my own incredible power. For 33 years, I had allowed Patricia Gregory and Brittany to aggressively shrink my world. I had folded myself into the cramped, suffocating box they specifically labeled for the boring, quiet sister. I had silently absorbed their constant belittling, their sneering remarks, and their endless demands for my absolute submission. I had mistakenly believed that keeping my head down and working diligently would eventually earn their genuine respect. But looking out over the sprawling metropolis I now commanded, I fully realized their cruelty was born entirely from their own paralyzing inadequacy. They needed me to be small, so their fabricated, debt-ridden lives could appear grand by comparison. Abandoning me in that foreign airport terminal was their desperate, final attempt to eradicate my presence completely. Instead, they ignited a massive inferno that burned their fraudulent reality straight to the absolute ground. The quiet, bullied sister they left behind never actually made it back to American soil. The confident woman who returned was a razor-sharp apex predator, heavily armed with federal warrants and an absolute uncompromising understanding of her own limitless value. I had forged my ultimate security out of the very betrayal meant to destroy me. I owned my narrative now, and absolutely nobody would ever dictate my worth again. A soft knock on the heavy frosted glass door of my office gently interrupted my thoughts. The door swung open and Harrison Tate walked in, bringing the rich, dark aroma of roasted coffee with him. He was dressed in his signature impeccable charcoal suit, his presence commanding the room with the exact same effortless authority he had displayed in the German holding cell. He carried 2 steaming cups from my favorite local roaster, handing one to me as he took a seat in the plush velvet chair opposite my desk. Our dynamic had evolved significantly over the past month. The intense high-stakes crisis that initially threw us together had quickly forged a formidable professional alliance. We had seamlessly transitioned from accidental allies into a completely dominant force within the financial sector. Harrison's venture capital firm provided the massive financial muscle, while my forensic accounting agency delivered the surgical investigative precision required to secure multi-billion-dollar international acquisitions. But beyond the relentless corporate victories, a deep, incredibly respectful friendship had beautifully blossomed between us. We understood each other, completely operating on the exact same frequency of quiet strength and absolute loyalty. I took a slow sip of the hot coffee, noticing the warm, lingering gaze he directed at me over the rim of his own cup. There was a subtle, undeniable current of electricity running smoothly beneath our daily professional interactions, a quiet, thrilling promise of something much deeper, waiting just beneath the surface. He placed his cup on the polished obsidian desk and slid a sleek, leather-bound contract folder directly toward me. "The paperwork for our new international holding firm is fully finalized," Harrison stated, his dark eyes gleaming with shared ambition. The global markets are completely wide open for us now. I picked up my platinum pen and signed the executive documents with a steady, highly confident hand, officially cementing our new massively lucrative joint venture. We raised our coffee cups, clinking them together in the quiet, bright sunlight of the corner office. It was a silent, incredibly powerful toast to building an untouchable future together. As I look at the freshly signed contracts and the incredible life I have built, I realize exactly how far I have traveled from that terrified woman stranded at Gate 24. I am no longer defined by the greedy people who desperately tried to break me. I am defined solely by my own strength, my fierce resilience, and my absolute refusal to ever surrender my power again. The journey from being the discarded family scapegoat to becoming a highly respected chief executive was not forged through quiet forgiveness. It was forged through establishing unbreakable boundaries and demanding total, uncompromising accountability from those who sought to harm me. I learned the hard way that you absolutely cannot heal in the exact same toxic environment that made you sick in the first place. Sometimes, the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you need to be protected from, and the best revenge is simply letting them drown in the consequences of their own actions. You possess the ultimate power to walk away and build your own empire entirely from scratch. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members? Let me know in the comments below, and never forget, your worth is not defined by those who fail to see it.